Can't believe the things that I do just to make it very comfortable, man. Water. Hi there, everybody. You all wondering why I'm wearing this, right? Yeah, that's exactly right. We're talking about Sonic the Hedgehog, ladies and gentlemen. And no, it's not about Sonic Frontiers. In case you didn't read the title and the thumbnail itself, we're talking about Sonic the Hedgehog, but in his GBA days, known as the Sonic Advance Trilogy, starting with Sonic Advance 1. You guys gotta buy me a Sonic shirt at some point because this is getting tiring. While I am aware we are also in the middle of the Mega Man X franchise, bear in mind that this small video marathon of the Sonic Advance trilogy is not at all random. In fact, this entire trilogy for the Game Boy Advance has been on the back of my mind for quite a while now, especially considering that I did promise you guys that I would cover these games when we reach 3K here on YouTube, upon which we did, so thank you guys very much for that. And now here we are with a Sonic suit and everything. God, cannot believe this is my fate. What's even funnier about this is that Mega Man and Sonic have actually collaborated in the past besides Smash Ultimate and Smash 4, because there's actually a series of comic books dedicated to the Blue Bomber and Blue Blur of Speed joining forces and tackling against Eggman and Dr. Wily, so that's pretty interesting. And also either very coincidental or perfect timing. The judgment is on you there. What's even more of a coincidence, if you will, seeing the amount of Sonic discourse on Twitter about Sonic Frontier since its debut, it seems like it's more than an appropriate time to discuss some of Sonic's earlier modern roots before the whole controversy of whether or not reused assets are a good or a bad thing occurred. Man, I sure snuffing love this community sometimes, and I love how much they appreciate Sonic. But to give some more background about my personal relationship with Sonic here, this Blue Hedgehog has been a character and a series for me since my early childhood days, dating as far back as 2004. Believe it or not, where 4-year-old me remembered watching my uncle, who at this point might also just be a recurring theme given how much the bastard has influenced my gaming decisions, pop the Sonic Mega Collection disc on the Nintendo GameCube, and I would often see him play the original Sonic the Hedgehog and Sonic 3 there, being one of the core memories that I have to this very day no less, given how much the Sega mascot struck a chord with me as I saw him go up and down and through loops and going as fast as he possibly can without a care in the world. And to kind of emphasize that feeling a little bit more, and I guess to give you more screen time with this suit, I'm telling you guys, please just give me a Sonic shirt at this point. I would love to rep that than this. It's getting pretty tiring, but anyway, tension aside, I remember watching the Sonic CD opening on the Sonic Mega Collection that they had in like one of the menus for it, and it was so amazing to see on like the old TVs back in the day, Sonic zooming through the speed of sound, the animation that Toei did for it, and the Sonic Boom song just playing in the background. Like, man, it was such an amazing and joyous moment of my life, and just wanted to throw that out there. It was also about 2 or 3 years later, at about 2006-2007, where my experience with the Blue Blur would also be a bit more apparent thanks to the GameCube ports of both Sonic Adventure and Sonic Adventure 2. Two games I do hope to cover someday, given how these were the games that influenced me the most to be the Sonic fan that I am today. That, and also I was pretty fond of that one Sonic game that was releasing for its 15th anniversary that I thought looked cool too. I wonder whatever happened to that one in the end. Beats me. But seeing that I was mostly exposed to Sonic through the console games, in terms of the handheld itself, well, Sonic Advance was nowhere to be seen or even heard from me, since I had zero idea of these games' existence to begin with, until the arrival of Sonic Rush came at our doorstep for the Nintendo DS back in 2008. I think around this time also I began playing the infamous Sonic Advance Flash version that was basically in every single Flash game website out there. Like, I'm talking Newgrounds, Fribs, and Cool Math Games era. Shout out to you three for making all our childhoods back in the early 2000s. It was there where I would experience a version of Sonic Advance that of course I absolutely enjoyed because it reminded me a lot of the Mega Collection back in the day, but I knew I was mostly intrigued by the pixelated artwork and how the game overall managed to blend the modern and classic elements together, as well as just being something different for me to experience as a Sonic fan. And you know what? Let's actually talk about the history of Sonic Advance while we're at it. 2001 is the year to thanks for giving us the idea behind Sonic Advance, if we want to get a little bit technical here. I mean, seeing that by this point in time, Sega was no longer officially a part of the console wars thanks to the ever-living success of the Sega Dreamcast and its crushing competition against both the Nintendo 64, Sony PlayStation, and now the emerging generation of consoles such as the Nintendo GameCube, Sony PlayStation 2, and Xbox, Sega now had to double down in making hardware and find some new ways of promoting the Blue Hedgehog than ever before through their software. if that somehow makes any sense. But yeah, it was around this point where Sonic was beginning to be multi-platform, the way we know him as today, as deals from Sony and Nintendo were being thrown at them out the wazoo to ensure that at least the mascot that Sega grew fond of over the course of 10 years would still stay alive for a bit longer, more so with Nintendo than with Sony given their history both as rivals and now as unlikely friends of the bunch. Guess Sony was too much for them to tackle back in the day, and who could really blame them seeing that they already had about 2 or 3 mascots similar to Sonic the Hedgehog at that point. And thanks to this team up of sorts, it was here that the inception of the Sonic Adventure games being ported on the upcoming Nintendo GameCube would be announced, as well as additional titles for the Game Boy Advance, now taking the charge for the handheld setting, and likely was eager to present the 3rd generation of Pokemon, among other things, given how much of a dominating force that purple Digivice contained. And so with all of this thrown at them, Sega would now employ the third-party developers known as DIMS to work on this upcoming handheld Sonic Adventure, seeing that they did take a dip into that with Sonic Pocket Adventure back in 1999. But for many of us modern fans, we know these guys more so with the Sonic Rush trilogy later on for the Nintendo DS, which speaking of, I'm gonna make it known here and now that if you guys really enjoy the Sonic Advance marathon that I'm doing, I will definitely cover Sonic Rush Trilogy, because I actually have a lot more of a personal history with those games in terms of the handheld setting, like I've stated before, and I think it would be a really fun marathon to tackle in terms of like how a 3D Sonic works. So want to throw that out there, and yeah, I said it, Sonic Rush Trilogy, ratio me. Or don't, anyway, let's move on here. Here, DIMS would then be on board and worked on the project alongside with Sonic team to develop a game that would, as they put it back then, be a modern approach to Sonic while reminiscing also on the classic elements that made Sonic's debut happen. And that's something that I would like to say real quick about Sonic Advance here. The entire Sonic Advance trilogy, to skip way ahead here for a bit, speaks of that classic to modern blend, and I really do commend both teams for doing that, as it made newcomers who never grew up with classic Sonic by this point in time would enjoy, as well as those who did rejoice in what Sonic games were always about. Though it is a shame that it's not something we dumb in recent memory, given how well developed and fast Sonic and the gang are in these games, and seeing the rise of Sonic Mania, I do hope Sega can take a dip with fan developers and give us something like Sonic Advance 4 or Sonic Advance Mania maybe? And you know what, who can really say for sure on that front? We'll just have to wait until Frontiers releases. Anyways, Sonic Advance, as the title would stand for the Game Boy Advance, would release for that handheld and was then showcased at the very first E3 convention, and also later at a Nintendo Space World event, you know, the Nintendo Directs back in the day, to then release later on that year in Japan and then in 2002 for the West, being published by THQ for some apparent reason. I guess they really wanted some money in the bank given that Sonic Advance would be like this massive hit or something, who can really say for sure. But besides that point, I think it's finally time to dive into the Sonic Advance trilogy if you guys are ready for that, and considering that for many Sonic fans this is the golden goose or golden egg for some apparent reason, I'm actually excited to see why. And so ladies and gentlemen, get those Sonic shoes ready to go if you bought them and they sold out, whatever it is. It's time to finally tackle Sonic Advance 1 for the Nintendo Game Boy Advance. Oh no, X-Bang's up to no good again, so Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, and now Amy here has to stop him, and that's honestly about it for the story. Like, no, I'm not exaggerating, this is legit what the entire game is all about. There are no space lizards trying to pest on the moon, there's no water dragons causing Noah's flood, and no party game with weird crystals to find. It seems that Sonic Advance is all just a simple plot of Eggman doing bad, and you gotta go stop him along the way. And that alone makes me intrigued by what Sonic Advance has to present overall, because this means the gameplay is all what the game needs to showcase in order for me to see what the deal really is with this one. Now, I don't know if the other games are going to do the same thing in terms of presenting such a bare bones plot, but it's not like I'm complaining either, more so just wondering, well, what exactly was the whole purpose of Sonic Advance to begin with? And the answer here, well, bring a modern take on the classic formula, because yeah, that's basically what Sonic Advance is all about. You play as 4 characters, you go through the same number of zones, you beat Eggman the same way, and rinse and repeat, but this is just me explaining it to you as if you were a fan of the classic era to begin with, which I would imagine many still were by the time 2002 was around the corner. But for those that didn't grow up with the Sonic Adventure era like I did and many other Sonic fans who did during the early 2000s, and I think the best way to describe Sonic Advance, as well as the whole trilogy for that matter, is that it was the Sonic Mania before Sonic Mania even existed. And here's why I say this. As stated, the modern take of the classic formula is very prevalent in Sonic Advance, starting with the character models of Sonic and the gang, as they all look more like their Sonic Adventure counterparts more so than their classic ones. And looking at this almost 20 years later, goddamn, the GBA pixel art still to this very day remains consistent in its presentation. Like, I'm wondering what kind of magic Nintendo had up their asses in that system's hardware to provide the most incredible pixelated graphics that to this very day continues to look fresh and modern as opposed to most games that were releasing around that time. Sonic and the gang here just look so well done in their animations, and it's just so pristine and specifically detailed that I really enjoyed the little touches that Dims made to ensure that Sonic Advance wasn't entirely a classic Sonic formula game on handheld, but something that could still be a part of the modern timeline, so to speak, in terms of Sonic's adventuring days. And as someone who grew up with the Sonic Adventure era, that makes me appreciate Sonic Advance a whole lot more now. However, that being said, this game still emanates that classic formula, but mostly through its zone design and aesthetics. Sonic Advance has the usual green hill / beach zone, a military base zone, a carnival zone like that of Sonic 3, an ice zone like that of an ice cap zone, and of course, like in Sonic 2, you're high up in space for a final zone. So there are again those elements that classic Sonic provided among many other things here. Loops are prevalent, the stop and go in certain zones are established primarily in the middle two, and of course you have the usual gimmicks and platforming challenges that make Sonic, or rather classic Sonic, stand out with some additions from its modern contributions like the grind rails, which rarely show up, I gotta be honest, so I guess they don't count, and even if they did, it was kinda hard for me to use them since they don't have this hit detection when you're close to it, so I guess these were probably last minute decisions, who can really tell. And like the classic games too, at the end of the second act of each zone, you're faced with new machinations that Eggman has up his sleeves again, utilizing his knowledge from the past and wondering how he's going to tackle the gang here this go around. Yet I say this, and by the final zone, Eggman is using his weapons from the classic games, which is a neat little Easter egg. Props to Dimps and Sonic Team for utilizing that, but also Eggface. If they didn't work then on Sonic, what makes you think they're gonna work on him now, huh? Now going back to the zones, I want to say that I like what they offer, I really do, but I can't say much about them because these zones can easily be seen again and again in the previous games, especially if you played Sonic 2 and Sonic 3 back in the day, and now more so with the help of Sonic Origins, say what you will about that collection. But these zones, you guys, I'm sorry to say, they aren't that special at all to me because they practically are the same thing as their classic counterparts, but now they have a bit of a 30-bit to polish to them, and that's honestly about it. I mean, they get the job done, and that's fine and all, but I wish there was slightly more emphasis on newer stage themes to make Sonic and the gang stand out a bit more besides the GBA pixelated graphics, or at least apply more of the modern platforming elements of Sonic games, like the homing attack for instance, to kind of keep the momentum going and add some more flavor to these classic style stages. And to talk about the controls here alongside these stages, Sonic and the gang, or at least Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles since Amy is playable here for the very first time, play roughly like their classic counterparts as well, which by no means is a bad thing for this first game anyways. Sonic runs, jumps, spin dashes, and has the insta shield from Sonic 3, a nice detail that I admire, but he plays the same as classic Sonic, so what you know from those games, just apply them here and you'll breeze through those stages like it's a regular Saturday morning. The same is said with Tails and Knuckles, where Tails flies, swims, and I guess does this twin tail attack at times, which kind of reminds me of the attack from Sonic Adventure, and as far as I'm aware, I don't think this was even in the original trilogy, but he plays the same as the classic era too, and personally my favorite because of these abilities. I mean, with the swim ability alone, it made breezing through the water section of Ice Mountain Zone easier, and like those games, those twin tails can be lethal, so use them as caution since their hitbox isn't as strong as they seem to be. And with Knuckles, it was the standard running, jumping, gliding, and wall climbing like he did back in the classic game, so again, not much explanations with him, but like Tails, he was quite fun to mess around with because of these classic features, so major compliments to Dims for not only retaining that identity of the classic games, but also trying to keep things slightly fresh and simple for newcomers here. And then there's Amy, where, okay, she runs and does the job done in platforming, sure, but her means to attack requires to use her hammer, and she doesn't have a spin dash like Team Sonic here, but instead this pathetic little forward jump that barely gives any distance. I mean, sure, this suits her nature, what her character is, but I wouldn't mind having more of what the other guys offer and just apply it to Amy. kinda like what they did with Sonic Heroes for example. Alas, Amy here feels like a one-to-one recreation of her Sonic Adventure counterpart, and that isn't a good thing when you look back on that. Overall, I think I quite enjoyed my time with this one, and it's nice to know that Dimps wanted to keep things as simple as possible without trying too hard at making Sonic different from his classic era days. However, there are some things I do find fault on Dimps' behalf with Sonic Advance here, and that is mostly the layout of the zones themselves and how in some cases you're out and about with supersonic speed, but suddenly you're at a stop and have to do the equivalent of Marble Garden Zone platforming, which isn't fun first of all, and it kinda does ruin the pacing a bit I find, as well as not also really emphasizing the skills Sonic and the gang have here that would allow for different pathways to clear the stage as fast as possible like you would then in the classic games, which was the very reason of playing these guys in the first place now that I think about it. But the biggest fault I have to say about Sonic Advance though has to go to the special stages, because why in Mobius did they think it was a good idea to utilize the pseudo 3D graphics of the GBA to make these stages in the first place? Seriously, it doesn't work at all, Sonic team. It was so confusing to see the depths of these rings, and it also felt very disorienting that I honestly did not bother to collect the Chaos Emeralds here. No sir, I'm not willing to test my patience at all, as well as my feel of death on what is considered to be bad game design, even if it's for the sake of possibly getting another ending for this game. You know, hopefully the other games kind of fix those special stages, because I think there's a lot of potential in that, and I really do want to see that final boss. Now, of course, I would like to say more about Sonic Advance here, but for what was presented in the end, I think I've said all I needed to say for this one at least. It's fun, it's solid enough to enjoy for a good hour or two, and it's what a Sonic game is at the end of the day. A platforming based on speed, momentum, and just overall excitement to reach the end of the stage as fast as possible. Now with 3 more buddies to join you on this task and more. And if you want to play this, then by all means go for it, since it is Sonic at its finest, no BS attached, and just something to mindlessly go around and enjoy for a good few hours or so. And honestly, that's about it for Sonic Advance 1, so here's hoping I do see a lot more of Sonic Advance 2, since that's coming up next. Obviously we have Mega Man X4 down the line as well, so stay tuned for that one. And of course, if you're new in the bunch, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I gotta do that self-promotion, because YouTube is, you know, it is what it is. But for those that have been here for a very long time, obviously you guys know I like to end it. So thank you guys so much for all the support. Keep being awesome. Keep spreading love and kindness into the world. Keep improving yourselves each and every day by 1%. And know that I love you guys forever and always to 120. And I can't wait to see you all next time. Remember guys, stay freaking sexy. Stay safe out there. And take care.